Right, this is your World War III update. Big news today. As many of you probably know by now, Trump has issued a 50-day ultimatum to the Russians that they need to completely cease in their hostilities and effectively come to some sort of brokered ceasefire terms by September 2nd. 50 days from now, 60 days apparently since the initial ultimatum was given. Now, most people are underestimating just how important and significant this news actually is. I would venture to say that we are at a new transition point in this conflict, and nothing this big has happened probably since the Nord Stream explosion. And we're going to talk about why today. But first, let's think about the timeline, okay? Because the timeline is so incredibly important. You really have to ask yourself, why 50 days or 60 days? Who else received a 60-day ultimatum before attempting to be assassinated? Was that not the Ayatollah? Okay? And did that not happen just on the heels of Operation Spiderweb, where Western intelligence agencies and the Ukrainian SBU plotted to wipe out Russia's leg of their aviational leg of their nuclear triad? All right? So if you're Vladimir Putin and you're looking at this as a veiled threat to your life. To be brutally honest, you have to be considering all options, which is why on all of Russia's main Kremlin mouthpiece medias today, which is essentially the equivalent of Western media, they're all the mouthpiece of Washington, more or less. So I don't say that in the sense that the propaganda in Russia is any different than it is here in the West. The only difference is, of course, we can protest. We still get beaten up by the cops in the streets. But nonetheless, I digress. What this means is that the Russians understand the gravity of the situation, and that this September 2nd deadline, let's round it off to September 1st, because we know how these guys like the element of surprise. Just like with Iran, they struck one day before the deal, the ultimatum, was supposed to expire. We can presume that Russia may actually consider some sort of preemptive attack. And that was made abundantly clear by Dmitry Trenin, who wrote a piece today, we'll talk about who he is and why he's important, that was broadcast on the front page of Russia Today, Russia's foremost and most internationally renowned news agency, in big, bold, emergency letters saying that World War III has begun and that it is a total war, okay? So we are entering in incredibly trepidatious times over the next 2 months as billions of dollars of weapons that Trump has now committed to funnel into Ukraine through the conduit of NATO and their blank checkbook. Apparently, MAGA's okay with World War III if they don't have to pay with it. That's the crazy thing. You know, I was divorced with MAGA, unfortunately, not by my own choosing, of course, on Election Day, because I warned people and I spoke up and I said, Trump is not going to end this war. This war is bigger than Trump. This is about being the preeminent hegemon in the world for the foreseeable future. And this is something that a president, it's not within his power to control the outcome of this, because it is something that is deeply ingrained in the Western-centric thought that the East cannot be permitted to be on a similar platform on the global stage. So this means that we invariably are going to ultimately end up in a state of full-blown conflict with these rising powers like Russia and China, which is why, I should add, this 50-day ultimatum really isn't geared towards Russia. It's geared towards China, because the 50-day ultimatum is written as such that if Russia does not comply after 50 days, then tariffs are going to be imposed on its primary trading partners. This, like I indicated, will crash the markets, because we're talking about China. We're talking about going right back to where we were when the markets were crashing earlier in the year with the 150% tariffs. Now, China and India collectively, I think they rely on 25 to 50% of their oil and gas imports from Russia, okay? So, you know, there's no situation, no reality that those billions of people, billions with a B, probably 1.5 billion people, more or less, in India and China are in some way reliant on Russian oil and gas. So there's no way they're going to relent in their support for the Russians. They may try to encourage Russia to do this and that, but at the end of the day, that's not going to work because Russia has its goals. And it also knows that I think they're going to play a game of chicken, and they don't believe that Trump is going to crash the global markets in order to protect a few Ukrainians. Of course, that's not what this is about. This is about global power. This is about maintaining the U.S. as a global reserve currency so they can continue to pump up the debt just long enough that they can rebuild their army that they're going to need to fight a world war. You got to keep the whole house of cards erected while you're reindustrializing, right? So they don't want to do anything premature that would bring the whole house down. So I think that's what Russia is banking on. But we also need to consider what could potentially happen between now and then. Is Trump and Putin just engaged in some sort of tango of the daggers where both sides believe that they are tricking one another? And Trump believes that if they can forestall Putin's plan for a renewed offensive in Ukraine, or another big offensive, which is supposed to be happening in Ukraine this summer, initiated by the Russians, of course, that maybe they could buy more time to deal with Iran. But perhaps what they forget is that Russia would want nothing more than for Iran to join the war, because that, of course, would greatly preoccupy the Israelis and the U.S. into a protracted quagmire, morass of a situation that is going to likely lead to a stalemate, ultimately, if they can't do their James Bond type decapitation stuff with any degree of success that they had on the first day. Now, in Iran, there's been a dozen explosions over the past day, and it's not receiving much media attention. The Iranians are downplaying it, but there's still a war going on there, okay? And that war is going to flare up very soon, because the Iranians have said that we're not going to cease in our enrichment. And there's some unambiguous messaging claiming to come out from the Kremlin that they don't want the Iranians to have enrichment, but I cannot attest to the veracity of those claims. If that was true, then that would be interesting, because that would not fall in line with the hypothesis that Russia wanted a war with Iran, because they would probably be encouraging Iran to do it. I think they know no matter what Iran says, they're going to get regime change anyways, unless they can really, take the initiative and lock things down. And to their credit, they have been very vigilant there as of recent. They have continued to monitor their airspace closely, closing it at night, more or less, and are anticipating another major attack. And Netanyahu is still in Washington as we speak, which is kind of weird when you think about how long he has actually been there. And of course, Putin must take into account the fact that Trump, in a leaked audio recording, recently gloated about how he would bomb Moscow and Beijing in a New York minute and not think about it. So all of these things taken into consideration, if you're Russia and you know that the JASSMs missiles are likely inbound, $10 billion worth of weapons, ruminations about putting troops in Ukraine and the imposition of no-fly zones, you may just want to engage in some sort of preemptive strike before NATO can continue its game of reconnaissance by fire, where they are effectively trying to find all the weak points in your system of defense. And if you know that this 60-day ultimatum is coming on September 2nd, then you have to presume that we're going to do some crazy shit in the run-up to that, which is going to look very similar to what we did to the last people we gave a 60-day ultimatum. Interestingly, in September, there's going to be a meeting with King Charles, who, of course, I believe is still the real leader of that country. I don't think, you can get away with being some sort of figurehead, symbolic or otherwise, in the way that they do, without actually, truly, genuinely still running the country behind the shadows. It's very similar to how the Commonwealth works here in Canada. They pretend that Britain doesn't run the country, and people give you all kinds of arguments as to why they don't. But ultimately, at the end of the day, just look at the numbers. how much crown land is in Canada. 90% of Canada is crown land. All right. So anyways, we're not going to go off on that, but consider that this could just all be psychological warfare. But I do think that we've definitely turned a corner here, and this is where it was heading all along, which is why I had my breakup with MAGA on election day. Again, not for any reason. I have nothing against those people. It's not Trump derangement. It's just, I tell it like it is, man, and I told you, and here we are. You have Russia Today talking about World War III in big, bold letters. I got to give you guys a little bit of a heads up. There's a reason why I looked so disheveled today, and it's because it has been a day from Hades, man. I woke up this morning and I was narrating an hour-long video for an upcoming video on the internet in a grid down situation, the myriad of ways that they could bring down the internet, our adversaries, that is, and how that might affect you and how you could mitigate that threat. And then I got a call saying that one of my beehives that I recently got, if you've been watching the Canadian Prepper channel, not our most popular video. Anyways, I got a couple beehives and one of them decided to swarm today. So we had to go out and try to catch this beehive because like hell, I'm losing a $500 beehive. So thanks to the people at Struan Family Apiaries, wonderful people, came out today. It was smoky as all hell due to these major forest fires that are burning. I mean, apocalyptic stuff. Anyways, we were able to successfully catch the hive. We're not too sure if we caught the queen, though, so that was something to see. I mean, it's so exhilarating walking through tens of thousands of bees. Unless you've done it, you just don't know. It's a crazy experience. I only got stung once. Anyways, we were able to trap the hive. After that, I was lumbering through the woods with a ghillie suit, a firearm, body armor, gas mask, a tactical helmet, bulletproof helmet, and a 120-pound load. How I carried that 120-pound load, well, you're just going to have to wait and see, okay? We got a video coming up on that as well. Then I had an hour-long chat with the government about this, that, and whatever, and then I had about an hour and a half to chat or to do some research for this video. Oh, and we were building a fence today too. The reason why I say that is not to or a farm as a homesteader or prepper. I'm well beyond the point of trying to gloat about that, because once you get into the lifestyle, you realize there's really nothing to gloat about. I just want to encourage people to be motivated to actually pair the consumption of this type of alarmist media, and it's rightfully alarmist because these are alarming things, right? These are things we should know. Information is power. At the same time, we got to be taking the steps to get ready for what could potentially happen here. We're talking about Day X possibly happening this year. This September deadline is very concerning because it could elicit some sort of preemptive strike by the Russians. And the era of bromance between Trump and Putin is at its end. This is the day that will go down in history as that bromance ending and us transitioning into a new heightened state of escalation in this conflict, as I said we would from day one. So go check out the Canadian Prepper channel. We're going to release a video today where I talk about whether or not going off grid is a good idea for you. And I want to make it abundantly clear that I don't think it's the right choice for everybody. And just because you can't do it or you don't want to do it doesn't mean that if the worst of worst case scenarios unfolds, that you have no options. There absolutely is options, and I talk about those on this video that we're going to release on the Canadian Prepper channel today. Anyways, let's get back to the news. Okay, so the reason for this 50-day delay, some other things to consider. This could be an opportunity for businesses to pivot, and because there's going to be a lot of people that are going to be impacted if those tariffs actually get pushed through. This could be an opportunity just to get the weapon systems that they need in there to enforce whatever it is they're about to do. There's a lot of rumors that they could potentially try to impose some sort of no-fly zone. I guess time will tell, but there is a commitment so far of over $10 billion worth of weapons to NATO. And again, I can't get around the idea that MAGA is perfectly content with funding World War III, or not funding, but encouraging World War III so long as we're not the ones funding it. That's insane. If it's really just about the money, then I don't know. It doesn't seem very Christian to me. And the only reason why I say that is because the overwhelming majority of people are Christian in MAGA. And we really have to scratch our heads and say, are we okay starting World War III just because we're not paying for it? And Trump is talking about $1 trillion a year in budgets from European countries as they boost their military spend to 5%. $1 trillion a year. Okay, so that's going to be great for the U.S. arms industry that needs to get restarted before the dollar collapses. And of course, all of these embargoes that are being imposed on Russia, how is Europe going to afford all this? I mean, where are they going to get the money for all this? People say, well, they're not going to be able to afford it. No, they'll tighten their belts. They always do. There'll be riots in the streets, but they'll tighten their belts. They'll find some way to, create some controversy to get people looking the other way, as they always do. There's a lot of money in Europe. It's not poor, but of course, it really just means maybe people living a little bit cheaper, right? And it all depends on whether or not people are willing to do that. And people are so docile nowadays, I suspect they will, especially if you can amplify the threat beyond what it truly is. Okay. So 50 days gives the U.S. and European forces time to position and coordinate for a layered escalation and militarily and economically. How much time do I got left here? All right, so according to Dmitry Trenin, a senior Russian foreign policy analyst, and this was big, bold letters on Russia Today, the mouthpiece of the Kremlin. Not quite Putin's brain, as they sometimes say. That is, what's that guy's name? I can't remember what his name is. Putin's brain. It's on the tip of my tongue. His daughter, Alexander Dugin. That's referred to as Putin's brain. Medvedev has been somewhat quiet lately. Have you noticed that? I wonder if he's in detox. Who knows? Anyways, Dmitry Trenin, a senior Russian foreign policy analyst, has argued that World War III is already underway. What a surprise. It is not yet defined by conventional invasions or single flashpoints, but now it's defined by global ideological, economic, and hybrid warfare between the U.S.-led West and powers like Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea. The pre-war period is over. He claims that the war with Russia began in 2014. The war with China began in 2017. That's when the trade war began with Trump under his first term. And the war with Iran began in 2023 in the wake of October 7th. He says this is not a Cold War. This is, in fact, a total war. The goal is not territory, but internal destabilization, economic sabotage, political unrest, and psychological warfare. The West seeks, I can't even talk, it's been such a long day. The West seeks Russia's collapse, not just its defeat. They want its total capitulation and collapse, regardless if it was Kamala Harris or Donald Trump. Compromise is no longer part of the game. Trenin claims the U.S. and its allies are pushing to solve the Russia question permanently. And he also accuses the West of dehumanization, political assassinations, and deliberate attacks on civilian targets, blah, blah, blah. The same old, same old. Trump is a tactical opportunity, not a savior, he claims. American elites will remain hostile to Russia regardless of who the president is. Ukraine is only the current theater in the real war is with the West. British and French weapons are striking Russian territory. NATO intelligence is directing Ukrainian operations. There still is that Poseidon plane that is manned by a crew of American aviators that is right off the coast of Sochi. Okay, and that's crazy to me that's happening right now, and we still aren't in Armageddon. The EU is preparing, of course, for a wider war. Now, here is the crux of the message that was being sent by Russia Today, publishing Dmitry Trenin's article on the front page and holding it there for an unusually long amount of time. This is what they wanted the West to take note of, because RT is international and it is largely geared towards Western viewers, to hear the Russian perspective as a Western viewer. Here's what he said. We must be prepared to strike first. If escalation is inevitable, Russia must consider preemptive attacks, and if needed, the use of nuclear weapons. Delays created the illusion of weakness. That must not be repeated. So what are they trying to do here? This is trying to turn it around on the West. Through the Dmitry Trenin article, who speaks, of course, on behalf of RT, who will not publish anything that really goes against the Kremlin in any meaningful way, in any way that is, destabilizing in its dissidence. And so this is their way of threatening the West, okay? And this is why they put this on the front page, that we are going to potentially do a preemptive strike. So now that you've given us an ultimatum, we've kind of given you one as well. The question is, what do they mean by that? What are they actually going to do? Well, his recommendations are that they strengthen alliances. He talks about Belarus and North Korea being dependable, but that a southern partner is still missing. Now, there's an argument, as I stated perhaps earlier, that Russia has a vested interest in the United States and Israel getting entrapped in some quagmire in the Middle East in the next 2 months because they think they can mop up Iran in 2 months and then come back to this problem later. That's the whole purpose of postponing. But the Russians do need a southern partner. They have Belarus. They have nukes in Belarus. It doesn't get more partner than that. Belarus, of course, is a vassal of Russia. North Korea has a nuclear defense pact, essentially with the Russians. There are thousands of North Korean troops currently fighting on Russia's behalf. They don't have that type of arrangement with the Iranians. In fact, it's questionable what their position is towards uranium enrichment, which I should add, Iranians persist in that they're unwavering in their commitment to having the freedom to enrich uranium. The Russians allegedly are unambiguously stating that they do not support Iran's ability or desire to enrich uranium, but I can attest to the veracity of the source of that information. Regardless, that really is the final piece of the puzzle, but it's hard for them to do that because of the power of the pro-Israeli lobby in Russia. They have their own version of AIPAC, okay? And for them to align that closely with Iran, whether or not Iran would even commit to that at all, is a subject of debate. There's all kinds of theories as to why Iran didn't get the Russian air defense systems. They don't trust the Russians because of what happened in Syria, where Israeli planes were allowed to run riot and Russian air defense didn't turn on once to shoot one down while Syria was collapsing, all right? So for a variety of reasons, or Turkey for that matter, who was involved in that war, the Iranians are reluctant to commit to such an ironclad defense pact like is had with North Korea and Belarus. But that is one of the things he recommends. Exploiting Western fractures, widen divisions in the EU, and undermine ideological unity. So employing the same subversive tactics as the West attempts to employ inside Russia and places like Iran. Engage in political warfare, fight back in the information domain, and interfere in Western domestic politics. Being pretty overt about that. Abandon illusions. This is a long civilizational war. Victory is not about occupation, but breaking enemy plans. Like I said, this war doesn't end until somebody wins. Otherwise, it's just a cold war. It's just been put on ice. And right now, it's 100% a hot war. With respect to the JASSMs missiles, let me see if I have any more details to provide you here. Anything I haven't said already, as I indicated. This is a big one. The JASSMs is a cruise missile, which is in a family of missiles. One in that family is a big boomer cruise missile, which could be nuclear tipped. That is not the missiles that Ukraine is getting, and it's not a missile that Ukraine is equipped to deliver. The F-16 platform can deliver the JASSMs missile, either the extended range variant or the older, shorter range variant. The shorter range would leave it just outside of Moscow. I think that's what they would start with, because that would be the next rung of the escalation ladder. Or they might just go to the extent, and it might not take too long thereafter to get to the 1,000-kilometer range version. Now, the question is, if Ukraine is launching hundreds of drones against Moscow a day, are these even going to be that useful? I guess it really depends, because Russia has never had one used against them in order to test out their air defense against. I don't think they're much different in terms of Storm Shadow. I think they're a bit more stealthy, if I'm not mistaken, but I'm not an expert on that. Regardless, this is a major escalation, okay, in and of itself. And this is all happening before 50 days. So the 50 days could just be a bit of a red herring diversion to take people's attention away from the fact that this is going to escalate right now, all right? So this is obviously going to give Ukraine deep strike capability to hit all kinds of high-value targets behind enemy lines. And of course, I think they would likely reserve the use of these things to, targeting the top brass of the Russian military, as has been the case in their use of the Storm Shadow and Scalp missiles. They are harder to intercept than ATACMS due to their stealthy design and low flight profile. Okay. Deployment would likely be viewed by a major escalation, of course, or this could just all be for diplomatic leverage and negotiations. It's hard to say. It appears as though the Russians, could be at a point where they're content calling for a ceasefire. I doubt it because they know what that means. They know, even if the Russians, were content with the territorial gains that they've made thus far, they know that any sort of break in the action will be exploited by NATO to bolster Ukrainian forces and rearm and go on the offensive, in the next few months or a year from now. So they really have to continue and keep the pressure on. What else do we got to talk about here? Coinciding with the ultimatum, as I indicated, they do agree to the rapid delivery of advanced weapons, including Patriot's long-range systems. And again, we don't really know what they're going to send because they're under no obligation to tell the Russians what they're sending to Ukraine. For all we know, they're already using JASSMs, to be honest. We just don't know. I mean, sure, the Russians might have discovered one by now, or they might have, some sort of signature that they're able to identify that would indicate that, and they would make it public, but we really don't know. The fog of war is incredibly thick. There's so much we don't know about this war. We just know the strategy of it. The tactics are very elusive. Okay, so in terms of what's going on in Iran, as I indicated briefly, multiple reports of unexplained explosions across Tehran amid a broader wave of similar incidents in the country following the recent ceasefire in the conflict. Official Iranian sources often attribute these to gas leaks or accidents, but the frequency and locations, many near sensitive sites, lead to speculation of sabotage, obviously linked to foreign actors like Israel. There have been approximately 10 to 12 distinct incidents based on aggregated data from real-time accounts over the past 24 hours. We're going to be talking to DD Geopolitics on Wednesday, and I think we got Professor Morandi back once again to hear what the Iranian perspective is once again and see if it has at all changed. See if their position towards enrichment and their dealings with the West is going to be altered moving forward. Go and check out our video on Canadian Prepper if you want to figure out whether or not homesteading is right for you. Thanks for watching, my friends. Take care. I got to go pass out now. Bye-bye.